So this is the poster from 1997 when we shipped the game. There's my signature there. Most of the development team and many of the Activision staff are on that poster. So we signed about 100 of these roughly that went out.
So who actually came up with the name?
They did. There was a number of names. I think everyone put in a name, but the one that we all liked was Dark Rain.
Dark Rain is a fantastic real-time strategy game from the dawn of the genre's golden era. Released in the late 90s, it took inspiration from Command & Conquer, but brought distinctive mechanical and gameplay advancements, along with a super unique vibe and presentation style that helped it to stand out from the crowd at the time. It was developed by Auran Development, an Australian company based out of Brisbane, funded by Greg Lane and Graham Edelston. Eventually released in 1997, Greg and the team went to great lengths to get their game not just made, but published, eventually securing a deal with Activision, who were seeking a viable candidate to go up against the juggernaut that was Command & Conquer. Dark Rain proved to be a massive hit, selling hundreds of thousands of copies and seemingly securing the future of Auran as a true player in the RTS genre. But as you may know, that didn't come to be. Dark Rain 2 was made by a completely different developer, and it was a massive bomb, both critically and especially commercially. Auran went on to develop different games, and they would never return to RTS. And Dark Rain as a series never took off, and aside from some ports and community revivals, it hasn't shown any signs of life since that doomed sequel. And if all this information sounds familiar, that's because you might remember it from the retrospective of the game I made late into 2023. Well, a lot has happened since then, because I was able to get in touch with Greg Lane, founder of Auran Development and lead developer of Dark Rain. And as it turns out, he's a total legend. To make a long story short, I jumped on a plane to Australia and sat down with Greg to talk about the highs and lows of Dark Rain's development, to learn the full behind-the-scenes history of how the game was made.
When the game first shipped, this was in Electronics Boutique in Australia, and I went down to the Gold Coast site and went through their store, and the whole front window was Dark Rain everywhere. Like, that's all it was. And I walked in, and the guy had come up to me and said, you interested in games? I said, yes. And he said, what sort of games? I said, I like strategy games. And he's like, oh, you've got to go and play Dark Rain, He said, this is a great game. And I was like, yeah, I've already played it. And he's literally like, how can you have? It only came out today. And I'm like, no, definitely played it. And anyway, eventually, of course, I showed him the business card, and he was like, oh, wow. So, I'm Greg Lane. I've been in the games industry for, 35, 40 years, from both board games through computer games, role-playing modules. Always been in the computer industry, though, as a programmer of some description, doing various titles. Auran began as a New Year's Eve wish, really. So myself and my soon-to-be business partner met at a party, and we got to talking, and we decided that we would start a games company just to see how we would go, really. There weren't really any big goals. It was just a case of, could we write something and how would it go? I've been playing computer games for a long time, and I'd been quite disappointed in some of them about various things. Like I used to play Command & Conquer. I'd be saying to my friends, why are those units running in and just getting shot at? Why don't they run away? It got to the point that my friends were saying, Greg, you've got to stop complaining and just go and write your own. So in the end, we decided that's what we would do. And it was really just came about to try and make a game that I would like to play. One that was very strategic, that highlighted player control, gave you a good sense of situational awareness and what was happening, and that the units acted reasonably. That's really kind of where the idea came from. I'd already had this concept of a game, a board game called Robots, that I had seen back in the 80s. And I'd always thought that was a great idea as to how that worked. And so it was that I modelled the tactics engine on, which went on to make the game Corporation, which then got renamed to Dark Rain. The tactics engine is based on this concept of where 3 units can be stacked one on top of the other. Typically a motive unit on the bottom, a gun type platform in the middle, and then EW or something else, electronic warfare, on the top. And again, this came from this game. This is the idea. Actually, there was just the two of us. There was just myself and one other programmer. And we were doing all of the design and all of the programming, literally out of my house. So I'd already been doing programming work for various people, so I had a 4-station network at home, which back in the early 90s was quite unusual anyway. And we worked on it for about 18 months, through until the time that we had a demo running. But the core of it at that point was it was heavily based on this engine concept, the tactics engine, which meant that you could control the entire game through configuration files. And so when we first demonstrated it, we actually had 2 games. We had Corporation, which is very similar to what Dark Reign, or what came of it when it became Dark Reign, in that the majority of units, the tanks, etc., all those things were there. All of the unit AI was done. A lot of what you see in the interface now was already complete. Didn't look like that, but it was already functionally complete. And then we also took a Wild West shooter, which was a bunch of little buildings with guys running around with pistols having a fight. And of course, they were running on exactly the same underlying technology. And I think that was the thing that kind of blew Activision away. I don't think anyone had seen a game powered by an engine before that point. A lot of people, of course, prefer to Unreal, but Unreal at that time was a static game. It wasn't an engine. It was really that concept that I think got Activision excited, because they could see that they could layer on top their own story or a whole different game if they wanted, and do so quickly.
It might have been forgotten at the time of dealing with bigwig publishers halfway around the world, but initially Dark Reign was just a garage project by 2 guys in Australia who had never launched, let alone made, a game before. And after the foundational months of Greg and his partner putting together a game you could actually play, they would realise that they had something good on their hands, something that could be a real success.
Having played all the games, and I was playing everything that came out, I felt that we had some concepts that no one else had, and I hadn't seen anywhere before. The individual unit AI control, the pathing systems, and I really felt that there was a massive untapped market in that kind of mod community, because there were already games being modded in that time period, but they were through a third-party tool set. They typically destroyed the copy, had to back everything up first. Reinstalling and uninstalling was complicated. It was not simple. And so because all this was configuration-based and you only had to copy one file, we kind of thought there'd be something there. So we felt we had something in that. Second part was we literally just ran out of money. Like, we had to get a deal. So we had gone through, I sold the houses, sold everything we had, and neither of us had any more money. All the friends and family money had dried up. We had to get a deal at that point. It was then we finally said, well, we think we've got it to a point that we can demo it. We showed it around, and it was at that point, I remember the head of the technology side at Activision reviewed our product, and he thought it was more technically advanced than anything he'd seen in the gaming industry to date, and that really G'd us up a lot. We thought, there's some positive things there, and he felt that it was better than the technology base that Westwood had for Command & Conquer. His report then, of course, went to Activision management, and I think that went a long way to moving it ahead.
The project that would become Dark Reign was undoubtedly ambitious, but the way that it had been designed meant that they had something truly special on their hands, and that gave Greg and his partner ideas on how to pitch the game to big publishers over in the United States. But there was a small problem to that. The creators were just 2 people in Australia, not a place that was really known for its game development scene, at least at the time. They were halfway around the world. And so while creating their dream strategy game was, a massive challenge, probably the bigger challenge would end up being finding someone to publish it and actually getting it out into people's hands. Because remember, this is the early 90s. The game development scene worldwide was much smaller than it is now, and it was well before the internet. To give you an idea of how early this was, Greg recounted a story for me where post-Activision deal, they would be sending builds from the studio in Australia to Activision in the States via their very rudimentary internet connection, but at the same time they would post a physical disc copy over to them, a trip that was 11,000 kilometers, and a lot of the time the disc would get there first. So big things were happening with the internet, and online communities were burgeoning, but it was nothing like it is today, where essentially any game has a chance to get caught up in the winds of virality and go huge, no matter where it was developed or how small the team was that created it. At this point in time, in the 90s, a publisher was imperative. Without a publisher, you had pretty much zero chance in getting your game out to players, because you were developing the game, but did you know how to print a box, make a manual, get it into stores? All of these jobs were ones that publishers were very good at, so they were essentially the gatekeepers of success.
We always knew that we would need to find a publisher, but we really had no idea about how to go about doing that. And we had a contact in the movie industry who had a contact in the States who was kind of a doors person. He could open doors and knew lots of people. So that was that initial avenue that we used to get there. The contact that we had here really said to us, you've got to beware when you go to the States. There's a lot of Hollywood in the games industry, as it were, and told us a little bit about the process of what negotiating would be like. So he'd said to us, make sure when you go there, stay in a big hotel, drive in a flash car, look like you got all the dollars, and don't say when you're going to leave. If they say to you when you're going, say as long as it takes to get the contract. So of course by then we'd spent all the money we had. We were down to literally nothing. I was riding a push bike. We had no way of paying the bill when we got back. So we went to the States. We stayed in the Mondrian Hotel. We drove around this big flash Jaguar. And when they did say to us, when are you going back? And I think the idea there is to try and do the final deal at the airport, so you're really under a lot of pressure to sign. We just said, we're not. We're staying as long as it takes. And that kind of really did take people aback. It kind of put us on a much stronger footing, I think, than we would otherwise have been. And so Robert, the fellow that we'd gone to meet, he did know lots of people, and he took us around to probably 10 companies that we demoed it to. And we didn't really know, I think, what we had. We thought it was good, but we didn't know whether it was really good. We didn't know, because you're quite insular being in Australia, we didn't know what was in development in the States and what people would think of it. I think the real first telltale sign that we got that we had something reasonably good was when all 10 of the people we went and saw all said, we will publish this. And by then, of course, we'd racked up a fairly sizable debt. So we needed to sell 30,000 copies really to just be break even. But in the end, we did go with Activision. There was a lot of negotiations, and I think we were back there every day for like a week at one point. And it took a long time. We were relieved to get a deal, but it all came down to how many we'd sell. We were looking through industry sales statistics, and there were lots of games selling 10, 20, 30,000 copies, and only a very small number of games that were selling more than sort of 50,000. And so it's very early days, of course, in the games industry, and particularly in the PC market. So there was some really big hits, but there was quite a lot of nothing happening. And because we needed 30,000 copies to break even, we were worried, I think, that would we make that magic number?
While Activision were of course glad to sign a deal for Dark Reign, the deal was much more impactful for Greg and his team. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Yes, a massive deal with a publisher like Activision was a game changer, and it did prove to be Dark Reign's single biggest thing that got it to success, but it didn't mean that they were just off the hook now for every game development problem that would come their way. Because in the time of immediately following the trip back to Australia, things would become drastically different.
That deal gave us advances on royalties. It meant that suddenly we had an income every single month where Activision would just send us a check, and that enabled us to scale up. So we went from 2 people in a home, my house at the time. We rented an office, and we went up to 10 people fairly quickly. My business partner had been in business a lot more, had been in international business, and so he was able to get into the political scene, into the universities. We had contacts everywhere, and that meant that our contact network grew very quickly. That was instrumental in us finding other programmers, making contact with other groups, but it meant we had a wider network of people, and that's how we found about the other smaller companies that were in the area. And we also got very close to that whole political community. Like the government were running Smart State videos at the time. They started filming them at our office, and it's just a whole range of things like that. I think Orange just had that unique mix of people that let it kind of become known. And once we kind of got out there and broke out a little bit, we were on the TV channels then, and the news were running stories on us, and we were in the newspaper, and it just sort of fed itself, and it just grew and grew and grew. And the irony of that is kind of that at the time, people, I think, looking at the games industry in Brisbane, saw Orange as the one that made it all happen. But the industry was already there. Orange just kind of gave the ability for the industry to be seen. I think that was the big thing that happened. It was a big deal to come back from the States with a contract with Activision, and we were on the news immediately as a result of that.
Dark Reign's technical developments were, at the time, nothing short of game-changing for Orin. Because of how they'd initially developed their project, Auron was in a unique position where their technical foundation could be layered on top with basically anything, even if it was completely different to the original idea or pitch that they had.
The engine allowed us to do a lot of things with every single unit that was difficult for other people that would have had to code, whereas it just came natively. Because it was all based on this tactics engine and every unit was controllable through a whole sort of API essentially, it meant that making new units was easy. You know, there were many times a request came through, can we have a unit to do this? Usually the answer was yes, and usually we could implement it that day. You know, it wasn't difficult. So that was a big advantage, that we were very reactive. I remember Activision saying to me a number of times that it was incredible the speed that we were able to change and make changes to the game. And literally the next week they'd have another build from us with, you know, that update in it. That happened a lot. Having only made that first game, I can't say that that was the norm or not, but certainly the feedback that we were getting from Activision was this was quite unusual, that game companies were that reactive to things. And I think also the individual unit AI, the pathing systems, yeah, a number of things like that. You know, the behavior model for units, all of that was quite unique. We'd not seen anything like that anywhere. And I know the guys at Activision absolutely loved that. You know, the fact that, you know, finally your troops didn't rush in and get mowed down. You know, they would run away. I really liked that. I was really proud of that and the pathing system and the build system. I think we spoke about the build system earlier, but that was something I really liked. The map was composed of a whole range of little tiles that blended together, essentially like a little bit of graph paper. And what the algorithm did that we had that ran ahead of time was calculated what all those blends look like. You know, so if you wanted to go from dirt to sand, there had to be, you didn't want a straight line, you wanted it to look somewhat seamless. And so there were thousands of tiles, and I had written the first draft of that algorithm to do that blending. And it would take hours and hours. You know, it was not my best programming work. It took like 8 hours or something for it to work. It was a long time. I remember one of the guys on the team came to me one day and said, I think I can get this to work in real time. And I was just like, it's impossible. You know, how are we going to do that? He said, I think it's doable. What he was trying to do was make it that when you scrolled the map, it didn't have to do every tile. It didn't have to do all, 8,000 possible blends. It just had to do what was on screen, which was a small subset. And of course, when you scroll the screen, you only had to do the tiles that came onto the screen that were new. So you weren't doing thousands and thousands of tiles. You might have been doing 10 tiles. So the subset was a lot smaller. So it was technically possible, but I still thought it was a big ask. Anyway, the guy that did it, I'm pretty sure he worked on it all night, because I remember coming in the next morning, he was still there. And I remember he had a bit of a dejected look on his face. And I remember saying, how's it going? He said, I've kind of got it working. And he showed me that scrolling around was fine. And I was amazed by that. And I said, well, what's the problem? He said, when you move to a different area on the mini-map where the entire map needs to be regenerated. Couldn't do it essentially in one frame. It had to take another frame. And I was like, can you show us? And he did that. And of course, what he was doing is every second scan line, essentially. But it had that effect. It kind of looked like, I don't know if you've ever seen in the movies where they have a satellite photo and it looks at the ground and it sharply comes into focus. So it's like a second later. It kind of looked like that. I remember saying, I think we can sell this, and he said, what? And I said, I'm pretty sure we can sell that as a feature. We showed Activision the next day, and I remember them saying, how did you get that focusing effect? That's amazing. And I think in the end, he got it to do it perfectly anyway, but that was sort of an intermediate step. But it was just so well coded. The team of programmers we had, it was amazing that such quality existed just here in Brisbane, because everyone was local. That fellow in particular went on to be the technical director at Blizzard. So, he was a really good programmer. I think they were all very enthusiastic to make something that was groundbreaking. Everyone in the company had this idea that we could break out, we could do something that no one had done before. All of them saw that what we were working on was quite unique. Every one of them had played games. They were all gamers. I think quickly people saw what it could be like. But there were also some funny times along the way that caught us by surprise. I remember there was one point where guys at Activision wanted radar pings on the map, and we didn't have radar pings. The typical, you're under attack and a little ping goes out. And I remember we had trouble getting the guy that was going to be writing it he didn't really want to write it because he was like, it's not going to overly help. Anyway, we were always playing the game ourselves, and I think that one particular game he didn't do well in, and I think someone on the team said, you realise that if you'd had radar pings, you would have known that would attack. So anyway, I think that fellow stayed back all night. And the next morning, I remember coming in, and not only did we have radar pings, they were like variable speed, colours. It was like rainbow effect. So it was just stellar. And I think that was kind of the mindset. It was just like, if you're going to do something, do it really well. I'd always had this view that to make a game have longevity, I wanted people to be able to get in there and use the tools that made it. And a lot of the products that shipped without a decent tool set or shipped with a very embryonic, you needed a degree to use it type tool set. And we wanted this to be polished, like it was part of the product. The map editor was very much like that. It was essentially the entire toolkit, because we not only shipped the editor, we shipped the manual, the Tactics Engine configuration guide, that showed you how to build an entire game. You could literally just throw out the art and build your entire new game on it, completely, yourself. I wanted people to own their maps and to be able to distribute them and, really have that feeling of ownership and pride in what people had done. Activision Legal really wanted to own the maps. They wanted them to be theirs. And I think the reason they wanted to do that, it was never said, and so I'm only surmising here, but I think the ultimate reason was they had the idea that maybe they could do a map pack that might be composed of the best maps that, people had done. And because they owned the map, they could then do so without any issue. But I don't think it would have been too hard to approach good map people anyway and just say, would you mind putting your maps in a map pack? I think they would have agreed. Most would have, just to get their name in the credits. For me, it was really about empowering the people that used the product. Early on, I don't think Activision saw the benefit in it at all. I think their view early on was, we don't need to tell people that it's got a configuration guide or an editor. And in fact, you note that that never shipped with the game. That shipped on our website. I don't think I could ever convince Activision, I never got them across the line, that there was value and merit in having user tools ship with the product. To get them to ship the map editor with the product was an uphill battle.
It's easy to look back on this and think, big bad Activision wouldn't let Orin do what they wanted. But that's a surface level assessment. In reality, Activision pulled out all the stops for Dark Reign and kind of proved why publishers were both so critical to a game's success, but also why they were great partners. Because despite a tense back and forth signing the publishing deal, and yeah, maybe them getting in Orin's way at times, Activision did turn out to be the right partner that Orin sorely needed.
There was no way that we could ever make the game as it shipped without their help. Like, they were instrumental in doing it. We had a musician here in Australia who had done some music for us, which I thought was quite good, until I went to the States and heard the music score that they'd done, and it was just chalk and cheese. Their stuff was great. So they did the box, all the legal contract work, all of the music, the scenario design, QA testing. I mean, there was a whole range of services that we couldn't have done without them. And they did a really good job on all of that. We first saw the intro movie fairly close to release when we were in the US, when we'd gone there. It was really good. Like, they had done an excellent job on that. I think the music was great. The quality of the video was just superb. And I think all of us, when we first saw it, were just totally blown away, And so credit where credit's due, they just did a terrific job. I know Josh and Greg and the others on the team at Activision there put a lot of effort into it, and it just looked awesome. And I think that's where a lot of their forte was. They were very much in that, presentation, audio, soundtrack, and visual side of things, that sort of Hollywood approach to things. But the only problem was that after we came to suddenly decide to get the game and the video onto the disc, we discovered it wouldn't fit. So no one had actually sat down and said, we've got a game, there's this many megabytes, and the video, there's this many megabytes, and that's bigger than a CD. That meant that there had to be some pretty heavy compression put on the video. So anyone watching the video now, it looks very grainy, particularly the writing, but because the compression rate was so high, we just had to get it to fit, and it didn't fit. Towards the end of the game, as we got much closer to release, the whole team actually went to the US. And we actually operated out of the Activision offices for the final 6 months, I think. So they relocated everyone, at their expense. So we all hopped on a plane and went over to the US. And that was terrific, working out of the Activision office. But it also came with the fact that distance gave us a little bit of a separation that we could sort of work unimpeded. And I think progress actually tapered off a little bit, because you're suddenly in this busy office, people coming and going all over the place. It was harder to focus, and they were more likely to have a meeting just for meeting's sake kind of thing. And I think that did get in the way a bit. So on some level it was good. I think they were worried about making sure that, they're putting in this big investment, and they wanted to make sure it was all going to happen. But on the other side, I do feel the progress was a little bit better when we were, some distance away.
Command and Conquer started the excitement. Warcraft 2 took it to a new level. Now Activision redefines real-time action strategy gaming. Multiplayer combat will never be the same. Dark Reign, the future of war, from Activision.
Early on, they saw us as a way to get a title out to compete somewhat with Westwood. I don't think they had any huge ideals that it was going to be this massive franchise or do as well as it did. But later in the piece, after we'd been there a little while, they wanted to do an extension of the title to put some more polish on it, essentially. And I think it was at that point that they really did start to think this could be big. You know, I'd heard figures around the office that, you know, oh, we can get into the hundreds of thousands of units, but no one ever really knew that that was the case. But I think later in the piece, there was this feeling that this could be a big title for them. I don't think they ever thought it would be their number one title at the time, as it became. It was almost every day that I felt there were more people on the QA team and more people in the meetings. And I remember we started out meetings and we were in one little room around one little table, and later on it was a table that was, you know, 3 rooms long, and it was just people everywhere. So it did get more attention, but I think that's the right thing for them to do too. As they realised it had more potential, they put more in. So it would have been very sad had they not done that. But they did. I think they rose to the occasion, and I think they did a good job on it.
Activision's involvement meant big things for Dark Reign, and like I said, it was instrumental in the game's success. Of course, one of the most impactful things a publisher can have on a developer at the time was in the financial aspects, either in a cash injection or a regular cash flow that could help the game be created in those final months of development. But it wasn't always that simple, and the future might not have been as clear as Greg and the team would have liked.
During that development phase, you're essentially spending, there are advances against royalties. So if you sit there and you think, well, okay, you know, we need to make $500,000 on this. But if you spent $500,000 for the next 12 months on development, that is your advance used up. There's no royalty left at the end of that. So you will have written the game, and Activision is going to say, oh, well, okay, we owe you $500,000 in royalties, but we've already paid you that $500,000. Because it's an advance against royalties. You're spending your own money against the royalties you're yet to get. And the contract says that if you spent more, you don't have to pay anything back. So you're somewhat insured like that. But we were facing this environment where every single month that went by, the amount of money that we actually got as a paycheck at the end of it was going to be less by that amount. And we already had spent this large pool of money to get the contract in the first place. So you don't really know during that whole development cycle, more than a year, whether or not you're going to make any money. Yeah. It's stressful. You know, we got to the point where in about August 97, we got our first idea of whether we would make money or not. And so, they had rang us up and they said, we've now got the in-cell data. We know what the stores are going to take day one. And we, by then, of course, knew how much money we needed to pay back, and we knew the development royalty we received to date. And so we'd calculated that we needed 30,000 copies to be sold to get just to break even. It's not making any money at all. And I remember the very first day they rang up, they said it was 300,000 copies. And that was like, hallelujah. We knew we'd made money at that point. But it wasn't until that day that we actually knew. And as we got closer to the day of shipment, it was closer to 400,000 copies. We went out and told the team, and Graham, my business partner, he went down the road and drew out a lot of cash and then threw it up in the air, was running around underneath it. So yeah, it was a relief. It was a big relief at that point because we knew we were going to be able to pay back family and friends, and we'd said we were going to give some profit share to all of the staff. I remember we wrote out the checks, and because we'd been told we'd have the money coming in on a certain day from Activision, and it hadn't arrived. And I remember Graham saying to me, we can't just do this yet. We haven't even got the money yet. Like we're about to give out checks and we don't even have the money. I was like, it'll be fine. So we wrote out all the checks, and luckily for us, the fax came through like an hour before we had the meeting, gave out the checks that the money had arrived. And I think people were thinking, what are these envelopes we're getting given? Is this a dismissal notice or what's it going to be? But they were royalty checks to everyone. So we gave a check to everyone on the staff. Game development is tough, and there was a lot of late nights. There were, by the time we moved into the development studio in New Farm where we were, we built a dormitory there. It was, people were sleeping overnight for projects, and it's a tough environment. And so it was really good to be able to, give something back, because people put in so much. So many of the staff, when we were doing Dark Reign, I would come in the next morning and none of them had, not all of them, but there'd be a number there that were there all night. That was quite common. because they just wanted it to be perfect. We had already started discussing the expansion almost, before it had shipped, actually, because as soon as they got to the point where it was going to be 400,000, the expansion was already in the works, essentially, at that point. So we had already started work on what that was going to be like and what the art was going to be for it. So next week was really just a pat on the back saying, wow, we did a good job. We all caught up for lunch. I think we all went and saw a movie at the theatre from memory. I remember, though, we were standing in the queue, and I remember I was standing there with Josh, who was the director on the Activision side, and we were at there was just a long queue. People that were all on the Dark Rain team. Pretty much the whole team was there. And there was these people that were, standing in front of us reading one of the PC magazines of the time. And it was a review on Dark Rain when it was about to come out. And they were saying, oh, look at this, can't wait to play this game. And Josh and I just sitting there watching these guys talk about Dark Rain. And anyway, in the end, of course, we mentioned to them that we were the dev team, and I don't remember how many signatures they got, but I know they went down the queue a bit and said, "Can you sign here?" And because how lucky can you get if you love gaming and there's the whole dev team? Yeah.
So they did the boxes, Activision.
Activision did the box. I think they did an excellent job on the box.
Yep.
The only thing I was concerned about is our agreement did a call for equal billing, where the number of square millimeters was the same on both logos.
So,
wasn't quite the same.
Oh, your logo's not even on this one.
It's because it's an expansion, and you wouldn't know that we did it, would you?
You wouldn't. The existence of Dark Rain 2 and the story behind its development is one that's puzzled me in the whole time I've been looking into Dark Rain, and many others I'm sure as well. So I wanted to ask Greg directly how this game came to be and what he really knows about it, why it was made by a completely separate studio, and if he and the original team had any input at all, or if they were even consulted.
So we had a lot of staff resign in quick succession, and it was not hard to realise why. I think we both Graham and I thought pretty quickly that this would be people going to Activision. The contract, of course, called for their no poaching agreement. They couldn't actually make offers to staff, but that didn't stop staff resigning and then making an approach to Activision, which kind of how it worked out. So there was no way around that. I never felt upset with any of the staff. They were going from Australian wages to a US salary that was twice in numbers, which, given the exchange rate, meant it was a fourfold increase in salary. So anyone would be crazy if they said no to that. So I think we knew the writing was on the wall and that's what's was going to happen. We pretty quickly faced a choice of, are we just going to take the money at that point that was coming in from royalties and just close the company down? Because, if you've only got a third the people left, do we just close it? We seriously considered giving everyone a nice big royalty check at the end of it that was left on staff and just closing up shop and just keep taking in the royalties from Activision and retiring, because there was enough money to retire at that point. We also considered, do we go on? Do we make another title? We'd have to recruit again. But that's what we decided to do in the end. Much like we did the first time with Dark Rain, we committed to something we couldn't afford. We got a bigger development studio and got more people in and worked on Trains, which was the next one we did. I was 100% positive they were doing Dark Rain 2 from a variety of things. You overhear conversations and, because I was at Activision, the building. So, so many times you hear conversations taking place or see an email here or there, or someone forwards an email accidentally that you're included on. So there were so many things that I was very, very, very certain they were going to do Dark Rain 2. And that's also why I was certain that's where the staff were going. But not all the staff went there. We did lose a lot of staff, but because of the fact that these guys have been doing a really big title. When you do a title that's that size and it's Activision's biggest hit for a while, and these guys are in the US, it's not hard at that point for other people to make an approach to them, whether it be Activision or someone else. And that's essentially what happened. So, some people came back to Australia and continued to stay with us. Other people went to other companies, and some people went to Activision. Dark Rain had all of the right people at the right time. Dark Rain 2 ended up with a subset of those people, great programmers and great staff and artists, etc., but it wasn't the same team. Also, the team that were then working on it had less overall experience in gaming titles and programming for game titles. The mix was different. They didn't have the same level of design knowledge on what was going to happen. And also they moved away from the engine concept and tried to make it more of a traditional game. And that, I think, limited a lot of their unit choices they could do during the design process. I think it was a case of Activision thinking, well, we've done it here, we can just replicate it over here again. And I don't think they saw that bigger picture. I think that was one of the big things that happened in Dark Reign that Auron did really well. And I think Activision themselves said this to me a number of times, that we kind of carried the ball on this, was how we marketed. Auron was one of the first companies to really go out to the community and market the game directly. I remember I'd said to a number of the people that were on the team that I wanted to start to talk to users about the game and get feedback from people around the world. And I remember I spoke to Activision about it and said I want to have this online chat. And the internet was really early in these days, so it was very embryonic. And they're like, how are you going to do that? And I said, I want to use IRC and I want to have a chat with everyone. And they said, what's IRC? So it was like, so Auron really pushed that. We were out there marketing the game online to a variety of people, and we purposely picked people too that were in the marketplace that had started very early channels and websites really early on, but we picked key people and we started to market and push it as best we could. That didn't happen in Dark Reign 2. There was that whole developer thing was just kind of wasn't there. And we also did different things, like we had this odd scenario where there was a pixel on screen, right? We couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And it went on and on for ages. And one of the guys wrote this really funny story about this pixel. It was hilarious, right? It was just an email that went around internally. But reading it as a programmer, it was just incredible. You just laughed the whole time when you read it. And I remember saying to our web person, we should put this online. We should make this a story and just put it up so everyone on the user community can read it. Very quickly, people were saying, where's the next one? So we thought, well, we better give this person a name. So we called them the Dribbler, because it was dribble, right? That's what it was. It was literally dribble. And so we called it the Dribbler. So then we advertised there was going to be a new story. So I got this guy and said, do you think you can write another one? And he said, yeah, I could do that. And we said, we just picked something odd that had happened programming-wise during the week. And so he wrote another story. Well, sure enough, this became mega popular. Every Friday, 5 o'clock, the Dribble went up. And if we were 1 minute late, it was like there were people emailing and saying, where's the Dribble? And people kind of loved it. And it just grew. And I think that was missing in that marketing side on Dark Reign 2. Just the heart wasn't there anymore. I had another idea for a game that I wanted to do with Activision, and I did pitch it to them. And they were concerned that it was a bigger step up from what Dark Reign was. That's where I really got the hint they wanted to do Dark Reign 2 themselves. And so I pitched this other idea that I had for how a war game could work. That I hadn't, and in fact, I still haven't seen one directly like it to this day. And pitched the concept and how the user interface would work and how it would function. And it was a war game that took place at an operational level. And I pitched that to them, and they were just like, well, we've never even really heard of anything like that. There's no game like that. We wouldn't know how it would work. It'd be too risky. So didn't want to go there, and I think they just wanted to do an evolutionary product. So yeah, so really when I found that out, I just like, well, it's not going to happen.
Dark Reign wasn't just a big game for the genre, it was a historic moment for both the Australian and Brisbane game development scenes. There had been successful games out of the country before, but coming back with a publishing deal from a big American publisher like Activision would have significant ramifications for the studio.
I think it not only put the Brisbane community on the map, I think it put the Australian development scene on the map. It was going back a few years ago, one of the agencies here in Australia did like a spreadsheet map of all the game companies and what their heritage was. And I reckon 50% of the companies traced it back to people who were originally working at Auron. It was kind of like that hotbed of ideas. Because of the fact that Graham did this amazing job of really spruiking the company to politicians and everyone alike, it took on this kind of life of its own. And it wasn't just Auron at that point. It was kind of bringing in the whole game development community in Brisbane. It wasn't about Auron in the end. It was about the fact that there's this massive group of developers who are making these amazing titles. And I think it was just because we had that different approach to business. It wasn't just a group of game developers. I think, Graham in particular brought that a totally different perception to the industry and tackled it a different way. I mean, because he wasn't technical. That was the oddity of the whole thing. He wasn't technical in the slightest. By the time I left, we'd done Dark Reign, Trains, Bridget, and of course we'd got into a whole range of publishing titles. That side of Auron was doing well, and Auron was well set up. It was a very good company structure, with a holding company at the top and then the various divisional entities, and every game was a separate company. I see a lot of people commenting online, this one title caused this company to fail or that company to fail. Auron was set up in such a way that if a game failed, only one company of the entire group would ever fail. But of course, the Auron group generally wanted to go down the path of developing that next title, Fury, And I was concerned about that because I was a big believer in the fact that you've got to have people on the team who have experience in what you're developing and like the title you're working on. Have a passion for it. Generally speaking, that was not the case for the Fury title. I think most people there were a little bit out of their ground, and they're great people, don't get me wrong, great programmers, but it was just something no one had done before. And so I got sort of cold feet about that and thought, this is a title I don't feel comfortable that we can make. And so I decided to move on. I've seen comments about how, when Fury eventually failed, that, someone else came in and took over. But that had already happened. There was already other investors in Aura, and they were already there before that happened. It wasn't someone coming in after the event. I don't know where that rumor started, but it's not right. But they decided to do that title. It didn't work. And so they then picked up the entire group and moved it across to a different name and kept doing the Trains product. So the group survived that single title failure, but it was ever going to affect one company. And the whole group was fine. Yeah, so it was just a title I didn't want to do. It's a hit-driven industry too, games, and it's great when you're having a hit, but there's lots of companies out there that don't, and you can lose a lot of money pretty quickly.
One thing that came up a couple of times in my research of Dark Reign were some management issues complained by a few particular staff members. I couldn't find any real source, just hearsay honestly, so I wanted to ask Greg if he could clear it up for good.
Any large company, Aura in its peak was like 130 odd people. There were a lot of people there. Some people aren't going to be as easy to get along with as others. We had a couple of people along the way that just thought Aura wasn't for them and went their way, and that's fine. We had one particular person there, for whatever reason, made a decision this particular day that they would open the blinds and let the cold air out and the hot air in, and got upset that I went over and spoke to them about doing that, apart from the fact it was ripping the blinds apart. But behind the scenes, of course, I had all these other people in the company email me saying, can you please go and fix this guy? He's letting all the cold air out, and it's getting really warm, and it's making such a racket with all the blinds. And I was really responding to requests within the company that, we can't have that kind of behaviour. And of course, this was very early on in the internet space, and that person did leave eventually and got disgruntled and went online and made a post, and anyone else that had worked there and left in whatever circumstance they weren't happy with, of course, jumped on board that. But the reality is that, most people that are happy there don't make a post. And I'm still working with some of these people 20 years later, so, you can probably read into that this person wasn't overly popular there anyway. But there's always going to be someone. You can't have 130 people and have every single person get on perfectly. I tried my best to do so, but it's always going to be the case. You can't do that.
One of the shadows surrounding Dark Reign is the Xbox Live Arcade version created by Magnetar Games. It's a real black hole of information. As far as I can tell, you can't get the game at all now, no matter what. And there's only a couple of videos on YouTube about it that even mention it. Some gameplay, no one really talking about it. So I was hoping that Greg could shine some light on its creation, because even though I know he didn't create it directly, maybe he was consulted about it or had a hand in its development.
Out of the blue, I got a call from a fellow who ran a company called Magnetar Games in Canada. And he said that they were looking at doing a Redux version of Dark Reign, and that they had very little experience in negotiating, and would I mind on their behalf negotiating with Activision to get the rights to do a Redux. And at the time, I was still in contact with a number of people with Activision that I could, open the doors there again. So I said, yep, happy to do that. And so we went through that process. We got it all legally signed off on. Everything was done, essentially. We had the royalties agreed to and exactly how it was all going to happen. And then Activision sent me a message one day and said, look, do you have the source code? Because we can't find it. And I said, what do you mean you can't find it? They said, you just need to supply the source code to the Magnetar, and away they go. And they're like, well, we don't have it. And they said, do you have it, Greg? And I said, look, you told me to delete it as part of the agreement. And I said, no, I don't have it. I genuinely didn't have it. And they said, well, we can't find it. And I said, well, let me ask around the team and see if anyone did take a copy. I asked around one of my immediate people that I knew on the team still, and no one had a copy. Or no one said they had a copy. I mean, I don't know, but no one said they had a copy. And so then I thought, oh, there's a couple of contacts overseas that I knew reasonably. One guy who had been to Australia, and I worked with him for a while, and he'd gone on and started a company in the States. So I rang him, we had a bit of a chat, and I said, have you got the source, and told him what had happened. And he initially said no, didn't have it. But later on the call sort of said, look, if I were to find the source, where would it go to? So I gave him an email address, and a couple of weeks later the source code turned up. So then I was able to supply it back to Activision, and away that title went. Yeah, so they did the Redux version of it. Magnetar's not really doing anything now, but two of the people that worked at Magnetar now work with me on the titles we're doing at the moment. So yeah, more world.
Another way Dark Reign continues to live on to this day is through its community that, yes, is still around, particularly through the fan-created patches, launcher, and integrated multiplayer suite. I always did wonder how they were able to overhaul a game that was created 25 years ago in really fundamental aspects like that multiplayer suite, and I hoped Greg would have some insight into this. But I also just wanted to ask him what he thought about having a game that he created almost 30 years ago still be played by a group of people and kept up to date to this day.
I think it's awesome that they're doing it. I was saying to you earlier, I always feel that for any developer, when a title ceases to be a title, they put it in their back catalogue, they're not making, distributing, producing copies anymore. I've always felt that it would be good for developers to make that source available, to the community. It's really a gesture of good faith, because what are they losing from that? If it's a game that's never going to be out there, particularly if they want to keep it, and you mentioned this in your video, want to keep it up to date and running on later versions of Windows, there's no way the publisher is ever going to do that. But if you've got a vibrant user community and they're happy to maintain the code base, why wouldn't you give them the code, right? That was always my mindset. So clearly they came across the source to Dark Reign. Can't tell you how. They have then taken that, obviously, and made the relevant changes to get it running on the later version of Windows and recompile it, and everything's working. So I think it's terrific that they're doing it. And it is what I believe publishers should do, is to make that available. So yeah, I'm super pleased to see it. I miss it in a way. I really enjoyed it. Firstly, it was great fun. It was traveling the world and meeting lots of interesting people from the game development community, and it was very broad. When Oren started here in Australia, we developed a music studio to help with the music of the game, but we hired that out. So we had a lot of people come into the studio, a lot of notable people. Kylie Minogue came in at one point, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer was there, and we had all these other people come in, and they were signing autographs for people, and so it was a really fun, vibrant environment. I'm kind of glad I'm out of it in a way, because it was a lot of pressure and there was a huge amount of travel. To the point where I don't really want to travel much anymore, because in the space of the last 5 years, I got 2 million frequent flyer points. It's more than enough, right? And I remember one time I had to go and sign a distribution agreement overseas, and I was sitting at Brisbane Airport and in the departure lounge there, and a lady said to me, "Where are you off to?" And I said, "Oh, to Paris." "Oh, that'd be lovely. And how long are you there for?" And I was like, "Hopefully an hour." And literally, I caught the taxi, signed the agreement, came straight back, got on the plane, came back to Australia, because I was that busy. And so I don't miss that. I can definitely say. So it was fun, and I'm glad I did it, but I'm also glad it's over.
The thing that caught my attention the second I met Greg was just how much he loved games. The clearest sign of that is, as you can see here, his extensive collections. So naturally, I couldn't end the interview without first asking him about them.
Most of these games are games that I've played over the past probably 30 years. I've played every single game that's here at some point. And I think there's about 1,000 here. So quite a lot. All PC games in this room. I bought all of these when they came out. It wasn't like I had to go back on eBay and get them. See, there's trains, look. So that was the engine that we used. That's the engine that powers trains.
I first started, of course, in board games, not computer games, because there were there was Zork was available when I first started, pretty much. That was on the university computer. But prior to that, when I was, I think, 13, my dad was in the army, and he brought a game home from the army library, which was the African campaign. And I absolutely loved it. It was nothing, I hadn't seen anything like it. So different from Monopoly and everything else. And so from that day on, I started collecting. So this collection isn't just 1 year of collecting. It's, like 50 years of collecting. It kind of spans most of the board gaming existence, really. Board gaming started kind of in the 60s, but it really started to grow in the 70s, and that's when my collection started in the 70s. So it goes back a long way. I also got into role-playing back then. I'm one of the few, I think, that have one of the original Dungeons & Dragons, original edition 0, that I think I paid $9 for or something like that, and I saw it on eBay for 25 grand a while back. That's how long I've been doing it, right? So did that for ages. But of course, as soon as computer games came out, I absolutely loved it. So as you've seen from the number of boxes of computer games, I used to buy them religiously and just play everything. I just loved games. If you can't tell, I got a passion for games. Like I love games big time. But I always had a passion for computers. I didn't really know anything about computers, and I was living in the UK at the time. My dad had a posting over there, and when we came back, I remember I went to school in Victoria where they had, they didn't have a computer because no schools really had a computer, but it was right next door to La Trobe Uni, and one of the teachers could take programs down and run them through the uni computer. And so I remember he said to me, look, you're starting in the middle of the year, you can I'll just give you a pass, or if you try it, you get what you get. And I did it, and within the first 2 weeks, I was like, that's what I want to do. I'm a programmer. So I absolutely loved it. So I changed school straight away. I went to a school that had a computer, which was the first school in Victoria at the time that actually had a digital demon computer there, 16K of memory. And you know how back in those days you could buy your school books and everything. I don't know if you can now, but before school started, so you'd have everything. So they had a whole year course on programming in BASIC of all these things, right? So I went and bought the box of cards and did the whole lot, the whole year before it even started, because I just loved it. And then I thought, I'm a bit bored, and still school hadn't started. So then I went and I discovered that the computer had Fortran, so I went and did it in Fortran, which is what I'd learned the previous year anyway, so that was a bit of a cheat. And then I did it in COBOL. So I remember the very first day I turned up to class and listened to the lecture, and I went up the end of it and handed in these 3 massive boxes of cards. And he's like, what's that? And I said, that's the whole year. And he said, the whole year? And I was like, yeah. And he said, why is there so many boxes? I said, it's in 3 languages, right? And I remember he said, what the, you got to do for the rest of the year? So anyway, I ended up managing to go down to La Trobe and really do first year uni when I was in grade 12, which was just awesome. So I loved it. Ever since then, of course, I've been into computers. So when computers really started to become, more mainstream, basic TRS-80, Amigas, all that kind of stuff, I was just always into that. And I only had a few, but I always loved them. And then in 2005, I think it was, when it was eBay started around then, I thought straight away, all this is going to do is facilitate collectibles to move out of the hands of people that don't want them into the hands of collectors on a global scale, which was the first time that had ever happened. And so I thought, if I don't get in quick, I'm going to miss out. And I really wanted to build up a collection of vintage computers. So for the first couple of years, I just bought and bought and bought, to the point where eBay sent me a birthday cake in the early days. I couldn't believe it. And I was just buying stuff like it was going out of fashion and just putting it in boxes. And just every sort of old vintage computer I could find. And it's only been recent, in the last year, that I finally managed to get the shed to the point where I could unpack them all. And that's where I said to you, I had, 5 mini skips full of boxes, but finally got them all unpacked. And as you saw up there, what they're like now. So this is the vintage computer collection. So we've got on this side the Tandy range, TRS-80 range of computers. And then over here we've got the Apple series, Texas Instruments above it. And then the Tandy monitors. And on this side we've got the Atari 800. And on this side over here we've got the Amiga. And then lower down the IBM PC. They're mostly from the 80s, early 80s through to about 89, 90.
What's the oldest one you've got?
Probably be the IMSI, yeah. That's from the late 70s. It's my intention over the coming years to get them all back to operational condition and get them all going and, programming again. Because I love programming. I love programming. It's a passion. But because I'm more in management now, I don't get to do it anymore. But a few of my good friends that I work with know that and tease me no end. I'll ring up and say, do you want to see some code? Because as a programmer, I don't know if anyone's watching this as a programmer, but I love looking at code. Just makes me feel good. And so, they ring me up and look at this, Greg, and yeah, it makes it tough. But yeah, I love games, love computers. And it's good, I can honestly say for whatever it is now, 40 years that I've been working, I've loved every day. I don't think it's a job. I get up, I can't wait. I have a fairly simple rule for games. There's a few things I dislike too, because I think what makes a good game means not doing certain things and also doing other things. And I think these apply whether they're computers or board games. My number one belief is that you must have a sense of complete situational awareness. You've got to know as a player what's happening in the environment. You've got to understand the implications of decisions that you make and other players make, and the game systems or interface or whatever it may be need to make those clear and concise and well known. One of my pet peeves in games, particularly in board games, is what they call end game scoring. And the problem I have with that is it might be, you'll have a secret victory condition. And you'll be working towards that. And only at the very end do you reveal it. And then everyone goes, oh, you've got so many points, you know, you've won that game. The problem I have with that is because none of the other players know what those conditions are, it's really hard to tell who's in front. And if you can't tell who's in front, that again is a situational awareness problem. I think you should know where people are, because I think it promotes behavior in the rest of the group to try and hold that person back. You know, if you know someone's well out in front, the rest will gang up a little bit, and it creates really interesting play dynamics. And they typically won't want to eliminate you because that takes too much of their resources. They just want to bring you back a bit. And I think it makes the game much more enjoyable when that happens. And it only works when the systems let everyone else know where everyone is in relation to everyone. So I think that's a really important point across all games, whether they be board games or computer games. You've got to understand what's going on, and you've got to have systems that promote making it obvious who's in front at the moment, and having game systems intact that allow other players to essentially gang up. It becomes a really good leveling system. And invariably, you know, and I've played thousands of games now, invariably, if you have a game like that where it works really well and there's lots of interaction with all the players, they all leave the table going, that was a fantastic game. But as soon as one person's miles out in front and they win with a little victory condition that gave them 100 points at the end and no one even knew it, it's not the same outcome. So right now we write software for builders so that people can view their homes in 3D and walk through it. So that's our number one goal over the course of the next 18 months. We want anyone buying a new home to be able to walk through it and see it in 3D and put the VR goggles on for every single home purchaser, which to date has been kind of impossible because the cost is too great. But the tech we're doing now allows us to do that automatically. So we can, you know, we can make you a VR version of your home, which might have taken 3 months previously. We can do it in about 15 minutes at the cost of about $1. So, you know, it's pretty game-changing. A lot of people that were in the games industry still work with me on that project today. Beyond that project, I want to get back into the board games industry. It's, you know, I've done, as I showed you earlier, 4 now modules for role-playing. I've done 3 computer games. I really want to now do a couple of board games, because it's kind of the trifecta. I think if you're in the games industry and you love it, you kind of want to do those 3 things, you know, role-playing, board game, and computer games. And board games, one I've not done, so that's next on my list.
So these are this is my start of my gaming career back at this module, which, look at the terrible art back then. We thought it was great. I mean, it's still great art for back then. You know, Keith's a good friend of mine that did this. And in fact, Keith, who did this module with me, worked at Orin with me on these modules. So we've been working together for a long time. This was a company we started back in the 80s called Darkstar Gaming. And we did this D&D module. It was one of the few, I think probably the first storylines for a role-playing game that had a traitor in the mix. I'm not sure, I mean, nowadays it's very common, but I'm not sure if anyone beat 1983, so I'm pretty sure that was the first. A few years went by, and then when I had Orin, we did these modules. So you think there's certainly a quality increase over the years, as you would hope. But yeah, this was a big step up, both in graphics and quality of product. I think it was the first series of modules that came with a DVD. So this was running the Orin Jet engine that we developed at Orin, and this was showcasing the 3D scenes that were part of the module. So you could actually put it on your PC and walk through it. I think it was also a music soundtrack from memory.
Thank you so much for watching. This was an amazing project to take on, and I can't give a big enough props to Greg Lane for being an absolute legend and taking an entire day to show me around, chat about games, and conduct this interview. I thought the information we covered was really interesting, and I'm ecstatic that the video is now released and out there for you all to enjoy and learn from. Massive thanks to my patrons and YouTube members who support me here. I really couldn't have done it without them. If you'd like to join, you can do so for as little as $1 a month, and if you want to see more documentary style videos like this one, then supporting me through there is the best way to make that happen. You'll join legends like Dakayo, Bad Ghosts, Sean Weber, Grey Spirit 4, George Rain, King Thickums, Pavel, Bram, Christian, Dan 4, Orion, Dus Rufkin, and Cameron. And my paladins, Johnny, Marika, Age of Cause, Joe, Tank, and Empyrean. So thanks again, really, and I'll see you all in the next one.